If you're looking for the last episode about Kubecon North America, then this episode is for you. Welcome back to the Is It Observable YouTube channel. Today's episode is going to be a bit special. It's the last episode on Kubecon North America 2024. In fact, it's the last episode of the year as well, so Merry Christmas to you all. And we will start with a new type of series, beginning of January. I promise, nothing about Kubecon anymore. So during Kubecon, of course, like usual, I do so many interviews that I had to split in different episodes, and I thought let's have a decent duration for each episode. So that's why here you're looking at the third episode that has only 3 interviews. So I met one of the speakers of the day that will talk about trace tests, very interesting story about how they use trace tests. So definitely recommend to listen to this interview. And then I met 2 different solutions. So one, a new observability solution called Highlights. Very interesting, very developer focused. So I was interested to learn more about what they do and see a demo. So if you enjoyed today's content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. So follow me in Salt Lake City. Second day at Kubecon, a lot of things scheduled for my day today. We have a live stream with the OpenTelemetry project, so a lot of things prepared to make that thing happen.
I work at Monday.com as a software engineer, and I work on the CRM offering of the product. So the talk was about how we reached observability everywhere at Monday.com. This is basically the journey that spanned multiple years on how we first instrumented our production systems with OpenTelemetry, and then how we started adopting trace-based testing for testing our systems. In the beginning, we had 0 observability and 0 telemetry, and that was a few years ago. And then we started slowly picking up by instrumenting one service at a time. We reached a point where most of our production systems are fully instrumented. And then we explored the area of trace-based testing. So we had observability in production, so we said, why not use OpenTelemetry to solve our testing problem as well? And that is what the talk is about, how we approach this area and how we implemented it, and what are the challenges that we face. Trace tests are the most useful when applied at the integration level. So you have your service and you have your existing unit tests or your service level tests. And now you want to test the whole system as a whole. So we want to test the whole Monday experience and being able to reason about different components of our system. And this is something that is not possible with traditional tests because you don't have that visibility. And OpenTelemetry provides you with that deep observability into the system. So as in the progress of testing your system, you also collect conclusions about how different components in your system are behaving. Because Monday is a highly visual and highly customizable platform, the user interface plays a significant role in our user experience. So when we approached trace-based testing, we wanted to test the whole experience. We wanted the user to go on the website and log into his account and perform some action and see that this action succeeded. So we wanted that high level of confidence, starting from the browser all the way to the deepest layers of our database, testing everything in a single reproducible flow, and having high confidence that it cannot break under any circumstances. Trace test is basically an agent that sits in your environment, and it connects to various trace stores like Grafana or various other trace stores, and it starts polling for traces that are relevant during this test. And before trace tests, we did the same flow, but we did it manually. We were sending the traces using the OpenTelemetry collector to a third party, and we are examining the traces manually. And trace test allows us to automate this flow and being able to write our assertions and put them in our code base. So now we will have an automated test pipeline that runs all these trace tests every time some component in the system changes. After we implemented integration tests and end-to-end tests, we said, why not use it for production testing as well? And the mechanism in production testing, it means that we are firing up a browser session, and we are starting the transaction from the browser. And we are collecting all the traces that come from the client side as well. And this means we can reason about the user interface and our backend in the same flow and have that confidence that our flow works in production. The next steps for us would be to use not just tracing, but to also use metrics and logs and correlate between all three for a more comprehensive test experience. And we also want to go into performance testing using traces. We have plugins for artillery and K6 that we plan to use. And we also want to do the continuous profiling, the fourth new signal. We plan to implement it soon, and it's going to be exciting. My goal with this talk was to spread this word to as much people as possible, because testing in the microservices era is really a pain, and it doesn't have a solution yet. No one found a good solution for that, and I think trace testing is a good step in that direction.
Hi, my name is Tim Nolet. I'm from the Netherlands. I am co-founder at Checkly, and we're building a synthetic monitoring platform. We're doing that for the last roughly 8 years of around 1,000 customers, actually a little bit more. And I'm super happy here to tell you a little bit more about the nitty-gritty of what we do. If you look at the broader observability market, there are quite some synthetic monitoring products out there. And maybe just for those people that don't know what synthetic monitoring is, it's also sometimes called uptime monitoring. And in a nutshell, it is we go to your website, we can click on things, see if they still work. And if they don't work, we send you a message. Could be an email, a Slack message, or an integration like PagerDuty. This is kind of the nitty, like most basic form of it. We do that for things that run in a browser, could be web apps, could be websites, but also for APIs. We're different in two very specific things. First reason that we're different is that we're using an automation framework under the hood. This is a framework called Playwright. It's built by Microsoft, and essentially it's browser automation. Folks might be familiar with things like Selenium, maybe Cypress. This is kind of the next generation. So we allow you to use that tool and use TypeScript or JavaScript to really write scripts that do exactly what a user would do when, let's say, they add a product to a shopping cart or they book a ticket through an airliner. And we integrate with that one-on-one. The second way that we're pretty different than all of the other vendors in the space here is that we allow you to do all of that from your code base. We call that monitoring as code. It's kind of a term we invented. We even created a Gartner kind of quadrant for it. And this means that, let's say you start using our platform, which I'm going to demo later. We have a web UI, look great, you can do all kinds of things, but Some of our larger customers have thousands of checks, have thousands of these pings going out to websites and APIs. That's all code, and that should essentially not live in our web UI. That code should live in your code base, so you can use Git or any other versioning system. You can do pull requests on it, you can work on it with your team, and then rerun it for you in our cloud. That's why we're very different, and all of our, let's say, larger customers are using this very specific workflow where it uses Playwright together with our monitoring as code solution. If you look at how we do things, people ask like, hey, you do these checks. These are specifically sometimes called black box monitoring or outside-in monitoring. So we go to a website and we essentially mimic what a user would do. What we also collect though is trace data right now. This is a part of our product that we released this year. And this changes kind of the game because synthetic monitoring is traditionally only outside in. Now we're also collecting inside out data. This is really cool, and I'm going to show you that later. What this means is that you as a user, that could be a DevOps person, SRE, write a little script that goes to, let's say, the most critical business function on your web app. Let's say a login or an add to shopping cart. If you have OpenTelemetry installed, we can actually ingest those traces and connect that specific synthetic transaction that you just did with those traces. So what we automatically do for you to make this happen is that we automatically add a parent and a trace ID in the correct headers. So you don't have to do anything. This automatically works for you if you have any form of OpenTelemetry instrumentation in your backend. So you're connecting this user transaction that you find important to your backend trace data. And it works out of the box. And it's pretty amazing to get this kind of X-ray, or let's call it a tracer bullet, all the way through your system. This is a dashboard that you're looking at right now, which you would typically see if you just log into Checkly. There's four checks running. And let me just give you the 1, 2, 3 here. You see everything is green, so we're happy. Let me show you our, let's say, flagship check. We have a bunch of check types here, and I'm just going to show you that. There's browser checks. These are the ones that go to a browser. We actually spin up a real browser and execute things. We have API checks, which is one HTTP call to an API. Multi-step checks, where you can do multiple API checks in a row to essentially mimic a user flow against your API. This could be fetch a token here, get a list of data from that, pick the third item, mutate that item, and see if that all still works. That's kind of the core of what we do. And this looks as follows, right? Here's a check that runs against a web shop that we use for demo purposes. This check runs every couple minutes. We collect we collect metrics there. You can edit that check, and this is where you see Playwright. You can see this is TypeScript, and what it does, it goes to the Danube web shop. That's a little joke because Danube is a river, and Amazon is also a river. It logs in and makes sure that after the login page, there's a dashboard that has a specific test. You write that check, very cool. You can actually run it interactively also to make sure that it actually works. And what you see right now, I just clicked that little button here. We're running this from a location in North Virginia. We can run your checks from 22 different locations around the world if you want to make sure that it all works from different places. This just executed. We have a little video that we record. This is all part of Playwright, by the way. If it works with Playwright, it works with us. And we have a Playwright trace, which is pretty fancy. You can step through all the test steps here, get all the network data, console log on every part of this test that was executed. Because what we're actually doing is testing in production. So what happens if this fails? Let's say this script fails, the login is broken, the database is down. Well, then we go into the alerting section, and you can hook up an alert channel, and we have kind of all the usual suspects that you would think to find. However, let's say you have 300 of these checks or thousands of these checks. All of that code lives in this little editor that we have in our web UI, which is great to get started, but it gets a little bit finicky after a while. Because let's say you have a login routine that you reuse over all of these checks. You want to dry up that code, right? So what we do is you can export that to code. and we have two flavors there. You can export that using our own TypeScript-based SDK, or if you're a Terraform shop, you can do it with Terraform. You can copy-paste that, and then you can start using that from your code base. And I can actually show you that, how that would work. And I'm just going to switch to my VS Code here, where I have that set up. This should be pretty familiar to most folks. There is a package JSON. This is just a code base that could be anything. Could be Python, could be Go. It doesn't really matter. Our SDK is in TypeScript. You can just add that. There's one Checkly config file that sets some defaults. But what's most interesting is that I have this spec file. This is exactly the same code you just saw in our UI. And you can just run this locally. You can debug it. You can, extract specific functions, put them in a helper library. Doesn't really matter. There's this extra file here. That's where it becomes interesting. This is all our metadata. This is where we say like, hey, run it from EU Central and EU West. This is where we would say like, how often should I retry it? This is where we could add these alerting channels, all those kinds of things. So what we specifically chose is let's keep this playwright code separate, and we add this code around it. So let's say you have these checks. I can actually run that from my command line in my code base. I have it set up right here. Let's just run this one. It's called Danube. And I'm gonna add a little flag here. What I'm doing right now is I'm running our CLI. The CLI has two specific commands that you will use day in, day out. Test and deploy. And I just ran test and it created a little link for me. And what just happened is that we took that spec file with that code and we ran it on our cloud. You can do this all the time. You can debug it, you can run it in CI, and just make sure that all of these tests are running, because we're in the testing phase right now. Now, let's say you're very happy with this. You say, like, okay, this makes sense, this all works. You would then execute a command called checkly test deploy. And what happens then is that we take this test, this end-to-end test, wrap it in this extra metadata that you saw, like where should we run it, and suddenly it's being turned into a monitor that runs around the clock, and if it fails, it will alert your on-call team, or if you're smaller, you can get an email. Let's look at tracing. So let's say I went through this whole setup. I built this check, I made sure it ran against staging, it all works, it gets deployed to production, and now production fails on maybe, an intermittent failure. Not the whole system is down, just something that's flaky. I have a check set up right here that has OpenTelemetry integration. And we can actually see here in our little timeline that this check failed. So I can click on that. We go to a test result here, or check result, sorry. And what you can see is that there's a trace here. And we can actually expand that. Let's open it. So what happened here is that we went to a little test app of mine that fails at random stages for demo purposes. This is a Next.js app, and we went to it. We did a GET request on the homepage, and somewhere in the Next.js library, which is the backend, something failed. And what we get here is essentially exactly what you would expect from a trace. So we get this information here, it's this step. We get all the exception logging right here. So we're connecting that backend to that front end. We allow you to do quite some assertions on all parts of the request that goes through. We don't have assertions yet on traces, but we have assertions on pretty much every part of, let's say, an API call. Let's say a JSON body comes back. It needs to have these and these specific items there. If you want to start using Checkly, it's very simple. We are very developer friendly. Checkly started as a dev tool that I wrote by myself, specifically for devs. We have a free plan, free forever, it's a hobby plan. Just sign up, you get a whole bunch of features.
So last day at Kubecon. I think it's time to pick up the shirt. Do one more interview.
co-founder of Highlight.io. Highlight.io is an open source application monitoring distribution, and we help developers proactively find issues, but then also troubleshoot those issues after the fact. We have three main products. We have a session replay or a RUM offering, where you can actually play back how users are interacting with your site. And then we have more of a traditional observability offering on the server side with logs, traces, and metrics. The way our open source solution works is there are two parts. There's a self-hostable part, which we call a hobby deploy, which can be used for free by everyone. It's Apache 2 licensed, and people can find it on github.com/highlight/highlight. The second part of our offering is more of an enterprise self-hosted offering, where we have banks, healthcare institutions, and other folks in regulated industries that use that offering, but also need our support, as well as enterprise features like RBAC and SSO and things like that. The third thing that I'll mention is that we also have a cloud offering similar to the other observability vendors out there, where you can actually run using our hosted cloud. So you can go to app.highlight.io and get started for free, and then there's a trial and all that fun stuff. Highlight is a pretty young company, and because of that, we've kind of used open telemetry as the guardrails for a lot of our telemetry data. And for that reason, all the folks that use us in the Kubernetes ecosystem just use the OTel collector alongside their services. And then beyond that, we also have some cloud integrations where they can push data from AWS CloudWatch, from Azure App Insights, so on and so forth. So the general journey is quite simple if you're familiar with the OpenTelemetry ecosystem, but we also have a team of experts that can help teams get set up and get started. In terms of our one-to-one support with actual Kubernetes concepts, we focus much more on the application level. So we don't actually give our customers like pod level or research-based insights in terms of metrics, but we more so focus on like the code level. So that's like logs and traces coming from the application, as well as metrics that folks can explicitly export from their system. So first of all, to find our open source repo, you can go to github.com/highlight, and here you can get started with the self-hosted deploy that I mentioned earlier. And that's called the hobby deploy. Beyond that though, if you want to take a look at our docs or go to our actual cloud offering, you can get here from here as well. And that's what I'll show in a second. So on the cloud offering, we have four main products, as I mentioned earlier. We have a session replay offering, which allows you to actually play back how users are interacting with your site. So here on the right, we can actually click play on a given UI and see what the user's cursor looks like and what they were doing at that time. That's also obviously very useful for debugging what the user's doing and what issues and frustrations might be happening. From here, we also expose server-side insights from the front end. So if I look at a network request, for example, I can actually not only see what's happening on the front end, but connect that to a downstream trace on the server side. And all of this is open telemetry. Once it hits the back end, everything supports open telemetry. And in fact, even from the front end, we support the W3C trace context for OTel as well. Then when we go back to the server side, it looks a lot more like a traditional APM product, where I can look at all my server side requests, I can look at all my metrics, and then I can also look at all my logs. On the metric side of things, it's really interesting because a lot of our customers not only use Highlight for looking at APM data and performance, but also how often users interact with your site. So having all that data in the same place can be very powerful. On the APM side, though, it definitely looks like kind of what you would typically see as what an APM product looks like, where I can see a count of specific resources, I can run aggregations on all of that, so on and so forth. So overall, we have a pretty comprehensive suite on the server side, but what really sets us apart is connecting all of that to the front-end traces and front-end session replay, and obviously the fact that we're open source, so folks can run this on their own. To get started on the front end, all you have to do is install our React or Angular or whatever it is SDK. So it is more proprietary than what you would do in OpenTelemetry on the server side. Yeah. Under the hood though, when you import that, we use a combination of OTel as well as proprietary stuff to get all of that instrumented so you can get both the session replay alongside all of the OTel requests and logs and things like that. For our metrics product, we don't have a particular query language that's like SQL-like yet. We use ClickHouse, so our plan is to actually expose ClickHouse SQL in the rest of our product this upcoming quarter, actually. But in the current state, the way it works is more like one of the drag and drop Grafana UIs, if you're familiar with that, where you can basically choose an aggregation. You can choose a group by, you can choose a function, so on and so forth, and then that's what builds the metrics. So it's a little more easy to get started, but not as complex as most of the options out there.
Episode, the last episode about Kubecon Salt Lake City. First of all, I think highlights is interesting. I was surprised that they were not relying on the JavaScript client SDK to do their RUM approach. So they use their own proprietary solutions, probably because they get more details out of it, and the JavaScript client SDK gives it less features to what they need to achieve. But again, very interesting that they are still mapping their own RUM details with the backend traces. So that seems, I think, very interesting as well. On David's story on trace tests was amazing. And then when I met Checkly is a very interesting solution for static monitoring. I was clearly thinking that they were relying on trace tests or they use traces in the background, but no, they use another approach. So at the moment, there's no assertions on the spans or on the traces like they explains. Maybe in the future, it will change. We'll see. If you enjoyed today's content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. So see you soon for another episode, a traditional episode about technology. See you.